"Do you see what I see?" barked Admiral Dravik Ocean, slamming his data gauntlet onto the central council table. The laser plasma readout flickered overhead, casting ghost light across the stunned faces of the Galactic Senate delegates. Rows of senators stirred, some curling tendrils in agitation, others secreting stress pigments that tinted the chamber walls a nauseating amber hue. A scent of brine and rusted air regulators drifted through the circular hall, betraying the artificial strain of running 17 different atmospheric balances at once. The ventilation grates struggled under the cacophony of multi-species biology. Heated gills, feathered carapaces, and damp thermal fins all pulsed uneasily beneath their formal robes. "Explain yourself, Admiral," Chancellor Trenzik Odun snapped, his 3 primary stalk eyes narrowing into slits. The Chancellor's armored limbs coiled inward, an involuntary reaction among his species when confronted with potential systemic failure. Dravik didn't flinch. "We ran the simulation 3 times across separate threat grids, cross-validated by both SentinelNet and the core logic spine on Station Hyrix. All scenarios show the same anomaly. Earth civilians, truck mechanics, utility workers, backwater medical techs are generating projected kill chain indices higher than trained operatives in 9 military species, including our own." A low-frequency hum vibrated from the ceiling, not from machinery, but from the murmurs of the Senate floor. Delegates exchanged frantic clicks, bursts of telepathic pulses, and whispering spore releases. Someone from the Zenori cluster released a startled shriek that ricocheted through the acoustics like breaking glass. "Your suggestion," rumbled General Varn Telerek from his suspended observation perch, "is that a human electrician has higher combat viability than an Arcani shock trooper?" "No," said Dravik flatly. "I'm stating that a statistically significant portion of their civilian population demonstrates instinctual war-fighting tendencies that outclass species with centuries of dedicated training. They don't even know they're doing it." Chancellor Odun exhaled slowly. The scent was pine-sweet with underlying bitter notes, chemical stress diffusing through the air. "Let me be clear. You're telling this body that Earth's commoners outscore our elite?" Dr. Calrex Jun, the xenoanthropologist, whose gelatinous form was coiled within a containment harness, floated forward slightly. His bioluminescent nodes flashed a slow pulse of alarm. "I reviewed the raw footage, Chancellor. This isn't simulated bravado or statistical trickery. This is culture as conditioning. They call it work, sport, survivalism. But from our lens, it's foundational war doctrine." "Give me an example," snapped a delegate from the Otran Combine. Dravik swiped a clawed digit across his interface. The laser plasma display flicked through dozens of cross-section feeds. A man welding a collapsed bridge girder under a thunderstorm, while others ran supplies across the structure. Another individual calmly stabilizing a pressure valve during a chemical leak with improvised rope and ducted sealant. An elderly technician repairing a live power relay while instructing his grandson on fallback wiring protocols, all without protective shielding. "These," said Dravik, "are not isolated examples. The median stress thresholds and decision-making speeds are military grade. They exhibit natural kill chain awareness. They identify threats, mitigate chaos, exploit structural flaws, and adapt dynamically, without orders, without a chain of command." "You're proposing—" "What?" Trenzik's voice dropped an octave. "That we classify their species as pre-militarized?" "No," said General Telerek. "He's proposing we classify them as post-militarized. We're looking at a civilization that never needed conscription. Their planet forged soldiers by accident." The silence that followed was deep enough to hear the subtle clicking of a Varaxian delegate's molting carapace. One senator tapped his cranial implant in disbelief, as if recalibrating his hearing might change the data. Dr. Jun adjusted his internal buoyancy and floated closer to the center. It may be worth noting, Earth's history shows no significant ceasefire period. Their planetary conflict timeline is continuous. Wars didn't pause with development. They evolved with it. Then they're unstable, hissed Commander Zeg Tarn. They can't be integrated. They already are, Drevik replied. We voted their inclusion last cycle. The door's open. A slow wave of panic rippled through the chamber. Chancellor Odun raised one of his lower limbs and tapped the control sigil embedded in the floor. The entire upper dome of the chamber shuttered closed, sealing the Senate into private session. The ambient light dimmed. All external transmission fields dropped offline. This was no longer a diplomatic discussion. Recommendations, the Chancellor said, not as a question, but a demand. General Telerex flexed his clawed digits, then spoke. We form a tri-species task force. Xeno-behavioral experts, military tacticians, cultural analysts. We observe without interference. Embedded long-range AI reconnaissance. Zero contact. We need raw civilian behavior under authentic Earth conditions. And if the data confirms this isn't a fluke? Then we'll escalate accordingly, Telerex replied, with a full re-evaluation of our military classification standards and, potentially, our planetary threat tiers. Someone from the lower benches chittered with nervous laughter. They've barely achieved stable orbital expansion. Their warships are crude. Crude, said Drevik with a sardonic glance, but piloted by a species that trains its children to navigate chaos for fun. Chancellor Odun turned his primary eye toward the central console and initiated an encrypted priority-level directive. Observation authority granted. Deep sky surveillance protocols to be applied to Earth sectors with high-density civilian operations. Ensure plausible deniability. As you command, General Telerex said. We'll begin insertion immediately. The lights returned to neutral glow. The dome hissed open again. Outside the chamber, the waiting press delegation surged forward, bombarding the Senate doors with questions. The Chancellor paused near the exit and turned to Drevik. One question. Yes, Chancellor. What kind of world produces civilians with kill records this high? Drevik paused, eyes scanning the display still suspended above them. A welder on a narrow scaffold, 3 stories above a flooded trench, calmly stabilizing a collapsing beam with only a belt strap and torque bar. A world, he said slowly, that made war a lifestyle long before it built governments. The door hissed shut behind them. The chamber remained heavy with unspoken truth. The numbers didn't lie. But perhaps the most terrifying part was this. The humans didn't even know. They weren't preparing for war. They just called it Tuesday. Sector 72, suburban highway interchange. The image sharpened just as a transport truck barreled through a stop barrier, tires locked, engine smoke trailing behind it. The driver had collapsed over the wheel. A civilian sprinted from a nearby auto shop, gripping 2 heavy chains and a floor jack. No pause, no calls for help. He lunged toward a roadside pillar, latched the jack to the base, and in one fluid motion hurled a chain around the vehicle's underframe as it skidded past. The chain snapped taut just before the truck breached a children's bus yard. Steam vented from its front grille. The man stood motionless, breath visible in the cold air, his jacket smeared with grit and oil. Pause there, Jun said quietly. The feed froze. Telerex exhaled through his teeth. He didn't assess. He didn't hesitate. That wasn't training. That was muscle memory. No badge, Jun murmured. No uniform, no recognition. That man may never consider what he did remarkable. Telerex turned toward his analyst. This is deeper than conditioning. They don't escalate under stress. They synthesize it. Jun blinked a slow pulse of acknowledgement. What's your recommendation? We track pattern saturation. How widespread is this behavior? What triggers it? What is their baseline stress threshold? The drone feeds continued to stream, showing more civilians. Firefighters improvising water lines through collapsed structures. Miners stabilizing shafts with bare hands and timber wedges. Long-haul drivers repairing broken axles in freezing winds with nothing but socket wrenches and wire. None wore armor. None called themselves soldiers. Yet their behavior formed a mosaic of conflict-adapted decision trees, fluent, autonomous, and utterly devoid of spectacle. Telerex tapped his control node. Collate everything. We need a behavioral heat map by sector and cultural subset. Jun nodded. And when the Senate asks what we're seeing? Telerex's voice lowered. We're seeing what happens when survival becomes subconscious. These people aren't at war. They've just never known peace long enough to stop preparing. A new feed blinked online. Sector 31, Coastal Refinery. A fire alarm triggered. A pipe ruptured. Flames curled from a vent as workers scattered. But one man moved the opposite direction. He disappeared behind a column, then re-emerged carrying an uncoiled hose and a repurposed foam dispersal unit. With smoke clawing at the ceiling, he climbed the scaffold ladder, not to escape, but to reach the intake valve. He braced a wrench against the pipe, twisted, slipped, caught himself on a support beam, and finished the job while coughing through the fumes. Jun whispered, "They normalize risk, transform it into routine." Telerex didn't answer. He was staring at the man on the screen. "Save that feed," the general finally said. "We'll need it for the Senate briefing." Above them, the heads-up displays painted a growing network of nodes, each human indexed by location, occupation, stress signature, and adaptive traits, a lattice of everyday decisions that mapped like a military doctrine, though none of them called it that. Outside, Earth rotated steadily in silence. Inside the Zentrix fold, the war analysts realized something grim. Earth had already built its army. It just never wore uniforms. General Varn Telerex stood motionless in the cold light of the debriefing chamber, surrounded by projections that pulsed with disquieting rhythm. Dozens of civilian profiles rotated across heads-up displays. Electricians, miners, welders, hunters, all unremarkable by profession, all tagged by the AI threat engine as combat-relevant actors. "They don't prepare for violence," he muttered. "They're shaped by it, like river stone hammered smooth by current." Dr. Calrex Jun rotated beside him in a containment shell, his translucent form flickering in shades of olive and gray. It was a scholar's color set, signifying contemplative anxiety. The chamber's floor was a map, Earth's biomes glowing beneath a mesh of behavioral nodes. From the Arctic Circle to jungle floodplains, suburban cul-de-sacs to wind-scoured highlands, every point pulsed with real-time data, task frequency, injury response, environmental risk adaptation, tool improvisation, reaction time variance. "I isolated 68 samples," Jun said. "The median task type varied, mechanical, agricultural, logistical, but the structure of decision-making didn't. Their civilians follow threat assessment patterns indistinguishable from battlefield doctrine." He pointed a pseudopod toward one of the feeds. An auto mechanic in rural Minnesota was prying loose a burning vehicle's axle, one leg pinned, face soot-streaked. Instead of retreat, he'd cut the line to the fuel pump with a jagged blade pulled from a shattered frame, stifling the ignition risk while motioning others back to safety. "Note the sequence," Jun continued. "He triages the source of hazard, neutralizes the volatile element, reroutes the immediate threat zone, and only then addresses his own condition." "That's a kill chain algorithm," muttered Telerex. Jun adjusted the display. New footage. A fisherman caught in a storm surge, lashing down makeshift anchors on a tilting pier. Then a roofer suspending a colleague with a tool belt during a structural collapse. An off-grid rancher using a heated drill bit to cauterize a wound on himself, finishing the procedure without sedation. Across scenes, Across regions, the behavioral shape held constant. Assess, stabilize, adapt, overcome. The names changed. The actions didn't. They exhibit recursive problem-solving under duress, Jun said. No tactical feed, no mission brief, and yet the underlying logic mirrors engagement protocols. Telerek's expression hardened. They don't separate utility from survival. Everything is a solution, until it isn't. Another analyst tapped into the network. General, we've completed the cross-species comparative profile as requested. A new frame appeared across the far wall, showing a timeline from species across the galactic core. The Relian, whose conflict era lasted 3 centuries before cultural convergence, the Sequel, whose wars vanished after energy abundance, and the Delic Coalition, whose unified governance banned lethal conflict after atmospheric balance. Beside them, Earth's timeline pulsed like a bleeding wound. Wars didn't disappear with development, the analyst said. They adapted. New tech, new triggers, industrial, digital, orbital, but never a break. Jun blinked slowly. Most species disarm after self-realization. Earth kept arming and innovating. They're civilians, not saboteurs. There's no protocol for this, snapped the delegate from the Trelvari Union, his voice warbling through gill filters that flared with indignation. The Senate chamber, usually an echo of quiet decorum, now churned with disorder. Projected heat maps floated overhead on layered laser plasma displays, flickering in time with tension. Earth's behavioral overlays, hundreds of red-streaked data webs, hovered like bruises across the Senate's rotating feed sphere. Chancellor Trenzik Odun coiled lower to the dais, his eye stalks lowered, lids flickering. "We are not here to indulge panic," he growled. "We're here to determine whether the data reflects reality or statistical chaos." General Varn Telerek remained upright, unmoving. The command node affixed to his forearm pulsed with recording sigils. His voice held no venom, just inevitability. Statistical chaos doesn't explain a grandmother in Kazakhstan wiring a hydrolysis ignition array during a winter blackout while baking bread. Muffled scoffs scattered across the lower benches. "You're reading too much into anomalies," said the Rithari observer, flicking his bifurcated crest in dismissal. "Cultural dramatics, storytelling, folk hero mythos. I've seen similar exaggerations in Koran Stormfisher clans. They didn't take down an elite ops unit with rebar and toolboxes," Telerek replied. "The Zenori Chancellor, a silken-bodied creature encased in translucent synth armor, let out a high-pitched whine. This data suggests that humans achieve lethal outcomes by accident. That's a statistical impossibility." "It's not an accident," came a new voice. Every stalk, eye, and echolocator turned. From the upper spectator tier, Ambassador Halvern Mikos stepped forward. Unadorned, save for a plain black jacket and a thumb-worn data slate in hand, he descended the curved stairs slowly, calmly, like a man walking through rain with no intention of speeding up. He reached the center floor, just beneath the suspended display, flickering with human threat behavior simulations. Without asking for clearance, he addressed the chamber. "You mistake intent for structure," he said, voice clear and even. "Earth didn't plan for this. We didn't sit down and decide to make every mechanic into a contingency weapon. We just learned the hard way what happens when systems fail. And no one's coming to help." A silence, taut as a drawstring, followed. Chancellor Odun's tendrils flexed subtly. "Are you denying the implications, Ambassador?" "No," Mikos replied. "I'm saying your implications are incomplete." Another wave of disapproval rolled through the room. "So you admit," rasped Commander Zaktarn, "that Earth's civilian infrastructure functions as distributed threat vectors." Mikos raised an eyebrow, the faintest flicker of a grin ghosting his face. "You call it threat projection. We call it being prepared when things fall apart." "Prepared?" the Trelvari delegate repeated, voice sharp with disbelief. You train your youth to shoot before they're legally autonomous. They're civilians, not saboteurs. There's no protocol for this, snapped the delegate from the Trelvari Union, his voice warbling through gill filters that flared with indignation. The Senate chamber, usually an echo of quiet decorum, now churned with disorder. Projected heat maps floated overhead on layered laser plasma displays, flickering in time with tension. Earth's behavioral overlays, hundreds of red-streaked data webs, hovered like bruises across the Senate's rotating feed sphere. Chancellor Trenzik Odun coiled lower to the dais, his eye stalks lowered, lids flickering. We are not here to indulge panic, he growled. We're here to determine whether the data reflects reality or statistical chaos. General Varn Telerek remained upright, unmoving. The command node affixed to his forearm pulsed with recording sigils. His voice held no venom, just inevitability. Statistical chaos doesn't explain a grandmother in Kazakhstan wiring a hydrolysis ignition array during a winter blackout while baking bread. Muffled scoffs scattered across the lower benches. You're reading too much into anomalies, said the Rithari observer, flicking his bifurcated crest in dismissal. Cultural dramatics, storytelling, folk hero mythos. I've seen similar exaggerations in Koran Stormfisher clans. They didn't take down an elite ops unit with rebar and toolboxes, Telerek replied. The Zenori Chancellor, a silken-bodied creature encased in translucent synth armor, let out a high-pitched whine. This data suggests that humans achieve lethal outcomes by accident. That's a statistical impossibility. It's not an accident, came a new voice. Every stalk, eye, and echolocator turned. From the upper spectator tier, Ambassador Halvern Mikos stepped forward. Unadorned, save for a plain black jacket and a thumb-worn data slate in hand, he descended the curved stairs slowly, calmly, like a man walking through rain with no intention of speeding up. He reached the center floor, just beneath the suspended display, flickering with human threat behavior simulations. Without asking for clearance, he addressed the chamber. You mistake intent for structure, he said, voice clear and even. Earth didn't plan for this. We didn't sit down and decide to make every mechanic into a contingency weapon. We just learned the hard way what happens when systems fail. And no one's coming to help. A silence, taut as a drawstring, followed. Chancellor Odun's tendrils flexed subtly. Are you denying the implications, Ambassador? No, Mikos replied. I'm saying your implications are incomplete. Another wave of disapproval rolled through the room. So you admit, rasped Commander Zaktarn, that Earth's civilian infrastructure functions as distributed threat vectors. Mikos raised an eyebrow, the faintest flicker of a grin ghosting his face. You call it threat projection. We call it being prepared when things fall apart. Prepared? The Trelvari delegate repeated, voice sharp with disbelief. You train your youth to shoot before they're legally autonomous. We also teach them to put out fires, patch power lines, rebuild homes after floods, and stabilize bleeding after car wrecks, Mikos replied. You're focusing on the outcomes, not the causes. Dr. Kalrex Jun drifted forward, his form unusually still. The cause appears to be environmental saturation. Your planet has not known prolonged peacetime. We tried, Mikos said, his tone dropping a degree. Didn't take. There was a beat of dry silence, broken only by the flickering of shifting data patterns overhead. You still haven't explained the anomaly, said the Centauri delegate, adjusting his cranial sensors. Your civilians outperform military benchmarks in stress response, kill chain decisions, and improvised engagements. I'm not here to explain, said Mikos. I'm here to offer context. Odun narrowed his gaze. And what form would that take? Mikos glanced upward, watching the feeds play loops of a man hammering a bent axle straight, using a slab of concrete and rope, then looked back at the Chancellor. "Let's test it." A ripple of disbelief radiated from the council floor. "Excuse me?" the Zenori envoy asked. Mikos stepped into the center projection circle. "You want understanding? Let's replace theory with experience. Your Special Operations Detachment. 5 species. Your elite. You select the mission scenario." "And your participants?" Odun asked. "4 civilians," Mikos replied. A pause. Then incredulous laughter broke from the outer rim seats. The concept spread like a contagion, equal parts scorn and anxiety. "You propose a live demonstration?" asked Zektarn, his scales fluctuating in alarm. "That borders on diplomatic provocation." "It's non-lethal," Mikos said. "Simulated combat parameters, training loadouts, controlled terrain, real variables, fake bullets." "And you believe your untrained people will survive that?" Mikos didn't answer. He just looked up again, watching another clip flicker across the suspended display. A rancher building a fire break by dragging a fuel drum uphill behind a broken tractor, using only gravity and a chain rigged from tow hooks and belt straps. He let the image speak for itself. Odun leaned back. "This chamber does not authorize theater for political stunts."
"It's not theater," Mikos said. "It's clarity." Whispers filled the chamber. Some delegates leaned toward dismissal. Others now leaned forward, unsettled by how calmly the human had delivered a direct challenge. "We've debated data," Mikos continued. "We've questioned context, doubted our own analysis. Let's stop speculating. Watch it happen." Tellergus was the first to speak. "I support the motion. Let the numbers walk." Jen pulsed darker shades but said nothing. Zektarn hissed again. "And if the humans fail," Mikos shrugged, "then I'll be the first to apologize." "And if they don't?" Odun asked. Mikos finally smiled. Not cold, not cruel, but full of something old. "Then you'll understand that Earth didn't train soldiers by design. It raised survivors who adapted to kill." No one interrupted again. Moments later, the Senate's Emergency Ethics Council convened in a sealed protocol session. The final decision was unanimous. Reluctantly, a neutral arena would be constructed aboard Station Rexis. Simulated weapons, dynamic terrain, 5 of the Senate's best, against 4 humans with no formal training, no armor, no coordination, just lived experience and the habits of catastrophe. As Mikos turned to leave the chamber, a younger diplomat whispered to his aide, "Why didn't he argue harder for his side?" Dr. Jun, gliding behind them, answered before the aide could. "Because the humans already know." The chamber slowly emptied. Behind them the displays kept playing. No banners, no speeches, just silent footage of ordinary men defying chaos and winning. The arena aboard Station Rexis wasn't designed for this, not for a test, not for myth verification. The observation decks were packed. Senate officials, military attachés, defense contractors, high above, a canopy of suspended laser plasma feeds gave every angle, thermal, motion, terrain integrity, biosignature trails. No one blinked, no one spoke. The announcer's voice cracked across the speakers like brittle ice. Scenario initiated. Neutral terrain. Non-lethal simulation parameters locked. Begin Operation Cycle 1. From the West Gate 5 figures advanced. Coalition elites, clad in composite armor, exoskeletal enhancements, and sensor-threaded cloaks. Each movement was crisp, optimized, choreographed. Centauri Sniper, Kazin Demolitions Lead, Trelvari Scout, Valeron Infiltrator, Ulari Squad Anchor. From the East Gate 4 walked in without formation. No armor, no helmets, no insignia. One wore a soot-streaked jacket patched with duct tape. Another had a roll of insulated cable strapped across his shoulder. The third had a socket wrench tucked into his belt loop. The last held a notepad and a roll of black tape. No salutes, no words, just eyes scanning the terrain. It began with silence, but that didn't last. Minute 1, the coalition team fanned into a staggered diamond, motioning to drones that ascended in coordinated flares. Thermal pulses mapped heat pockets. Sonic rangefinders pinged echoes from structures. The sniper took elevation while the scout identified elevation choke points. On the human side, movement was less structured, almost absent. The welding instructor knelt beside a rusted-out piping line, tapping the frame with a small piece of rebar. The livestock vet moved toward a shaded overhang, kneeling in grass. The electrician followed a drainage groove, unslinging the wire from his back. The demolitions expert stayed low behind a collapsed steel structure, carving lines in the dirt. Minute 2, the first drone dropped. No explosion, no signal disruption. It crashed mid-hover, its sensors scrambled by reverberating echoes, a grid of reflective plates bolted to steel beams, all angled to distort sonar. The sniper blinked hard, rechecked calibration. Still blind. The coalition hesitated. The humans didn't. The vet had smeared something across the overhang, animal hide soaked in compound. The Valoran infiltrator stepped through the corridor and froze. Biofilters detected a known predator scent. She dropped back, shaking her head. False threat, still triggered. Minute 3. The electrician connected the cables he'd been laying in the trench to a half-buried generator housing. Water poured in from a punctured pipe. Conductive mud swirled into the low ground. The Kazin stepped forward, heavy frame trudging through a side path, until voltage spiked. He convulsed. Safety systems shut his armor down to prevent real-world injury. Neutralized. 1 down. Minute 4. The sniper saw movement and took the shot. But the target didn't fall. It flickered. A silhouette made of wiring, foil, and bolts, rigged to swing with pulleys triggered by heat expansion. It collapsed as the shot landed. The welding instructor used that moment to relocate. No trail, just gone. On the ridge above, the Trelveri scout blinked, then screamed. A sudden chain reaction had detonated a series of pop charges buried in clay pots, built from fertilizer vinegar packets and insulated caps. No shrapnel, but enough concussion force to knock him off balance and into the mud-lined trench where high-voltage cables danced. Down. Minute 5. The vet drew the Alari's attention. She limped, dragging one leg, smearing red onto the wall. The Alari moved fast, blitz assault pattern. He never noticed the tape outline near the entry post, never saw the thin tripwire, never registered the chemical fuses buried in loose gravel. Chain ignition. Flash burst. His visor whited out, his armor hit the wall. Sim counted the impact. Neutralized. 3 down. The Valoran moved erratically now. Terrain was folding in on her. Data feeds overloaded. Biosensors triggered and reset every few seconds. She backtracked. The humans didn't chase. They reset terrain. The demolitions expert lifted the steel plate he'd wedged between concrete and rubble, tilting it toward the light. The Valoran saw her own thermal shadow, looked, hesitated, moved forward, and stepped into a snare made from tent wire and cable sheathing. Down she went. Minute 6. Sniper still active. He had one shot, one line of sight. The welding instructor gave it to him, stepping into view with arms up. The sniper fired. Target dropped, then vanished. Just a heat pad taped to a mannequin torso dressed in flannel. The real one was already behind him, wrench in hand, standing on a steel beam above the sniper's perch. Neutralized, said the simulation core. It ended there, not with victory music, not with applause. Just a room full of alien commanders trying to explain why 5 elite soldiers with synced AI and centuries of tactical doctrine were brought down by 4 unranked humans in 6 minutes flat. Dr. Kulrex Jun whispered, "They didn't follow any plan we understand." Ambassador Halvern Mikos stepped forward. "They didn't need one." Chancellor Oduin's voice finally returned. "Then what did they follow?" Mikos watched the replay again. Electricity arcing through muck, sensor bubbles misfiring, shadows turned into bait. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just answered, "Whatever works." The footage was reviewed 23 times, not because the committee doubted what happened. 5 elite operatives defeated by 4 unarmored civilians in 6 minutes, but because they still couldn't explain how it happened. Inside the debrief chamber aboard Station Rexis, the lights were muted, casting soft hues across tiered desks where generals, scientists, and intelligence officers sat stiffly beneath heads-up displays. Each screen looped a different fragment of the match. No single angle made it make sense. They didn't coordinate. muttered Commander Zach Tarn, breaking the silence. No comms, no unified formation, no visible signaling. They didn't need to, replied General Telerik, arms crossed tightly. That's what bothers me, Doctor. Kalrex Jun drifted closer to the central podium, the shifting textures of his skin rippling with unease. Observe frame 117. The main display pulsed, zooming in on the electrician. He laid the high-voltage trap without glancing at the others, without confirming placement, without waiting for support. Frame 144. The vet marked a false blood trail, but never once checked if anyone else was nearby to use it. Frame 201. The decoy dummy rose into the sniper's line of sight at the exact second the actual combatant moved behind him. They weren't following orders, Jun said. They were following logic, autonomous reasoning, asked a sickle analyst. More than that, Jun replied. They weren't reacting to each other. They were reacting to the terrain and reached overlapping decisions without coordination. So improvisation, no, the doctor said slowly. Convergence. A silence fell again, but it was heavier this time, like watching pieces of a machine start clicking together after denying they even belonged. They behave like distributed nodes, Jun continued. Independent, yet reactive. No hierarchy, no command structure, but still synchronized. Impossible, said the Rethiri general, shaking his head. You can't run a combat unit like that. You need structure. Your structure failed. Telerik cut in. Ours collapsed. Theirs didn't. On a side panel, one of the alien observers replayed the final minute in reverse. The sniper's defeat, the infiltration, Lead's misstep, the moment the Kazin brute dropped into the conductive trench. Each scene had its own cause, but what linked them was how no human intervened. No one came to assist. They never needed to. They weren't supporting each other, the analyst said quietly. They were enabling the battlefield. Dr. Jun turned a deeper shade of emerald, the bioluminescent equivalent of dread. We expected chaos. Instead, we saw modular execution, each civilian operating like an adaptive circuit. When one node acted, it reshaped the field for the others. That isn't random. It's embedded behavior. You're describing instinct, Zake said. Dangerous but inherently unstable. No species can sustain that long term. They already have, Mikos said. All heads turned. The human ambassador had entered quietly, standing in the threshold with that same neutral expression he'd worn since the start. You're assuming they're unstable because they don't follow your doctrine, Mikos said. You don't see the pattern because you're looking for rank, for direction. We stopped needing that centuries ago. Jun hovered closer. Are you saying your civilians are trained to operate like this? Mikos shook his head. No training, no scripts, just experience. We grew up with systems that failed us, so we became our own systems. That's not sustainable in a war, Zake snapped. Decentralization leads to collapse. Mikos stepped forward slowly. Only if your survival depends on orders. On the wall, a new feed appeared, compiled observational records from Earth. Farmers bracing greenhouses before tornadoes hit. Fire crews assembling makeshift pump lines from scrap during water shortages. Parents wiring heaters to batteries during grid failures. Guiding children by candlelight while cooking over repurposed brake drums. None were military, none were following plans, and yet none of them failed. It's not a strategy, said Telerik, voice low. It's culture, Jun pulsed in confirmation. What we're witnessing isn't a fluke, it's the default. These people adapted to a world that didn't protect them, so they stopped waiting for help. Zake tried to recover. That still doesn't mean they can scale. One squad isn't a war, every individual is a squad, Jun corrected. Or the start of one. On the upper display, a new simulation loaded. Hypothetical engagement. A mixed squad of 5 Earth civilians facing an armored assault team in urban terrain. They never met head-on. Instead, the simulation showed the civilians collapsing stairwells, flooding corridors, rewiring street lamps to trigger motion sensors, and rerouting sewer steam through ventilation shafts. The assault team never saw the enemy. Just shadows, misdirection. Threat layers stacked so deep, retreat was the only viable path. And not once did the humans speak to each other. They didn't fight the soldiers, said the analyst. They fought the environment around them. Zake sat down, slowly. Telerex studied the feed, then turned to Mikos. What happens when your civilians are trained, when they have doctrine? Mikos looked toward the screen, as if watching something no one else could see. Then they become worse. Jun's eyes dimmed. Worse, in your terms. Unstoppable, Mikos said. But that's not what you need to worry about. Then what do we worry about? Someone asked. Mikos turned to face the full council. That you're still measuring us by what we intend to do. You need to start measuring us by what we do without thinking. No one spoke after that. The council sat in silence, watching their defeat unfold again and again. No bullets fired, no orders given, just 4 civilians solving a puzzle they didn't know was supposed to be impossible. And winning anyway. The Galactic Senate convened behind sealed alloys. No recorders, no spectators. Every external signal dropped to black. What unfolded now was not diplomacy. It was self-preservation. Chancellor Trenzik Oduin stood unmoving at the center tier, his tentacles flexed into a coiled spire beneath his robes, a posture of impending declaration. Above him, laser plasma displays looped the simulation footage for the last time, 4 unarmed civilians dismantling a state-backed tactical squad, each move born not from orders but from reflex. We cannot afford neutrality anymore, Oduin said, his voice flat. I am placing reclassification of Earth on the docket. Permanent designation as a decentralized combat-capable zone. Murmurs rippled like seismic tremors. General Varn Telerik tapped his command slate. Emergency status protocol Theta 9 confirmed. Defense agencies across 9 systems support escalation. But escalation to what? Asked the delegate from Harrow Cluster. Containment, surveillance, sanctions. You cannot sanction reflex. The Centauri military representative, his face etched in layered bone ridges, spoke next. We propose perimeter lockdown, interdict Earth's outbound communications, suspend trade and restrict off-world movement of their non-diplomatic population. The room shifted. It wasn't outrage. It was disbelief wrapped in quiet dread. Dr. Calrex Jun floated forward, internal lights dimmed to hues associated with grief. You want to cordon off a planet that doesn't function like anything you've defined. How do you quarantine behavior? The behavior is spreading, said the delegate from the Darnathi Commission. We've already recorded multiple species mimicking human methodology. Improvised warfare, asymmetric engineering, tactical flexibility in social frameworks. Examples? Asked Telerik. 4 colonies on the mid-rim have implemented low-tech contingency drills. Their source? Human survivalist subchannels. Translated and emulated. They're adapting to Earth's logic, Jun said quietly. The heads-up displays shifted. New data lit up. Graphs, networks, streaming indices of Earth's most downloaded content across the galactic net. Simulated war games, escape room logic shows, competitive obstacle arenas, cooperative survival trials, children's toys that doubled as modular construction tools. We thought they were entertaining themselves, said the Herald delegate. But they're training, always training. Even their fictions prepare them, said Jun. Conflict isn't episodic in human culture. It's embedded in their narratives. He tapped a console, and scenes from human entertainment cycled across the air. Films of revolution, series based on resistance, games teaching spatial awareness, decision trees, group stratagem. Some were absurdist comedies, others emotional dramas. And yet every single one, somewhere beneath the surface, encoded conflict logic. It's not propaganda, Jun added. It's pattern reinforcement disguised as story. Oduin stiffened. So what do you propose? If containment fails and quarantine is porous, what's left? Mikos, who'd remained silent since arriving, finally stepped forward. You're still pretending you can separate human military's behavior from human civilian instinct. That illusion's been gone since the first welder laid a trench trap. He looked around the chamber, not with arrogance, but with the composure of someone who'd seen a wave build long before it crashed. You want to suspend Earth's participation in trade networks, deny them technological transfers, even restrict their cultural exports. But every data packet you block, they'll just replicate another way. You can't shut them out. Jun nodded. Their cultural system isn't centralized. Ideas diffuse organically, even if one node is removed. The next forms without prompting, like bacteria. said Tarn with a grimace. No, Jun corrected, like wildfire. The Centauri delegate stood again, this time slowly. Then we need to isolate the source of this strategic cognition. Where does it begin? Who trains the trainers? That's your problem, said Mikos. There is no trainer, no master node, no command doctrine, just exposure, environment, improvisation. Every human grows into a slightly different version of the same template, a decentralized combat reflex, Jun added. Evolved, not assigned. Behavioral, not political. But surely there's a boundary, insisted another delegate. A line where civilian stops and military begins, Jun darkened. I reviewed 2 decades of field surveillance. The boundary doesn't exist. It's conceptual, not operational. Telekar turned back to Odun. We can't label Earth's civilians as non-combatants anymore. The legal distinction collapses under functional review. A chill settled over the chamber, not a temperature drop, but something older. The kind of stillness that came before the old trees cracked in a wind they'd grown too proud to expect. So we suspend the category, Odun said quietly. The motion passed. Earth would no longer be categorized under any known military-civilian framework. Its individuals would be flagged under a new designation, Adaptive Autonomous Risk Units. It wasn't a classification. It was an admission of defeat. Across the upper decks, Senate aides watched from sealed galleries. Some took notes. Others simply stared at the heads-up feed where a boy, no older than 10, stood atop a small ladder, rewiring an attic fan during a storm while guiding his younger brother to hold the breaker switch steady. Where does it end? Someone whispered. Doctor, Jun answered without turning. It doesn't. The chamber lights never flickered. The air never shifted. No announcement marked the moment history pivoted, just a quiet door closing behind Admiral Drevik Oshan as he entered the restricted debrief bay aboard Station Rexis. Ambassador Halvern Mikos stood alone at the edge of the display field, watching a slowed replay of the welding instructor disarming an ambush with a crowbar and tin plates. The Admiral studied the scene for a long time before speaking. I reviewed the simulations. I watched the analysis feeds. I reviewed the biometric data. Mikos didn't respond. The Admiral stepped forward. We cataloged every movement, every variable, still couldn't find a unifying pattern. No doctrine, no central command structure. He turned. What happens when we face your professionals? Mikos took his time answering, not in delay but in calculation. I hope, he said softly, you never need to find out. The Admiral's jaw tightened. That wasn't a threat. No, Mikos replied, it was a warning. The Senate gathered one final time, not for judgment, but for recalibration. Heads-up displays arched overhead, not with projections of Earth's terrain or battle data, but with a single phrase suspended in dark lettering. Integration Protocol Vote. Earth Classification Revision. Status pending. Chancellor Trendzik Odun rid the room before speaking. There was no panic now, just wait, the sort that settles when denial finishes burning away. We have seen the simulations, Odun began. We have reviewed the failures, and we have attempted classification through every model available to this council. His voice darkened. None fit. Delegate after delegate raised the same concern that Earth's integration posed existential ambiguity, that humanity was neither safe to exclude, nor wise to contain, and yet exclusion was no longer viable. Containment had already failed. There was only one path left: cooperation. Dr. Kalrex Jun rose as the lights dimmed, and a new feed played, one none had seen before. This wasn't battlefield footage. This was a stream of Earth's educational broadcasts, open-access archives, entertainment reels, a man teaching children how to survive in forests with nothing but a knife and twine, a teenager assembling water purifiers from discarded fans, an elderly builder repairing foundation cracks mid-flood with shovel-shaped pressure clamps. They don't standardize war, Jun explained. They democratize survival. One feed cut in an Earth military recruitment officer telling new enlistees, "We don't build warriors from nothing. We find them already half-formed." "The rest is polish," gasps echoed. But not from what was said, what was implied. Earth's actual military hadn't been seen yet. They had only watched the amateurs. Ambassador Mikos returned to the floor, this time not with argument or challenge, but with terms. "Earth does not offer its military assets," he began. We offer transparency. We offer integration. You do not contain us by force. You contain us by alignment." He paused. "We join your Galactic Defense Council, not to learn, not to grow, but to ensure that no one misreads our nature again." The vote passed in less than a minute. Earth would receive one permanent chair, not for military planning, but for threat calibration, to advise, to observe, to warn. As the session closed, Oduan remained behind. He turned to Jun. "Why didn't they conquer each other into extinction?" Jun replied slowly, "Because their chaos was never about destruction. It was about adaptation. They learned how to sharpen themselves against each other, and somehow survived it." A final report was filed that evening, submitted to the Council's permanent archive. It was written by the last analyst to review Earth's total behavioral grid. His note was short, just one line. Earth never prepared for war. It simply never stopped surviving it.